I'm Alex Cobham. I'm the Director of Research at the Tax Justice Network. I'm an economist. And I want to give you a brief outline of the PALMA, which is a newish measure of inequality. So typically, people have used the Gini Coefficient as a measure of inequality when they want a single summary measure. And the Gini is a number that goes from 0 to 1. When it's at 1, basically one person has all of the income, or whatever you're measuring. When it's at 0, then the income is divided equally between all the people in the society. The problems with the Gini, I mean there's a number, but the main one is that it's oversensitive to the middle of the distribution. So it tells you more about what's going on in the middle than it does about at the tails, and we may actually care more about inequality as it affects the low end and the high end of the distribution rather than the middle. The other problem, though, is that the Gini is also pretty insensitive at higher levels of inequality. So when we're looking at more extreme distributions, for example at the distribution of wealth, which tends to be more unequal than income, the Gini really stops moving as the thing in question becomes more unequal. So exactly at the moment when we care more about the inequality, the Gini really stops being such a useful measure. It's quite good at lowering inequality, but as it gets higher, it becomes less useful. Now, the PALMA is an alternative measure that Andy Sumner at King's College and I have proposed. And this draws on the work of Gabriele Palma, hence the name. Gabrielle's an economist at Cambridge. Now, he identified a feature of the data, which is that the middle of the distribution, which is from the 5th to the 9th decile, so 50% of the population in the middle, tends to have about the same share of income in countries at low incomes, middle incomes, high incomes. Broadly, that half of the population captures about half, slightly more, of the total income, whether the country has high or low per capita income. Now, what that means, and we've shown that stability actually holds across time and even during different stages of taxation and transfers. What that means is that the moving part of inequality, the thing that's changing, and if you like, where the politics of inequality are, is between the top 10% of the distribution and the bottom 40%. So the PALMA ratio that we proposed is simply the ratio of those income shares, the share of the top 10% to the bottom 40%. What that gives you is a measure that is equally sensitive at low levels of inequality to high levels, unlike the Gini, but also focuses on the tails, on the bit where inequality really is. So if you like, it overcomes these two main weaknesses of the Gini. The other thing that's particularly useful about the PALMA is that it's very clear. If you want to give people a proper definition of the Gini, it's quite technical, and nobody can really tell you the difference between a Gini of, say, 0.36 or 0.38. On the other hand, a PALMA ratio of 1 has a very precise definition. It means the top 10% of the distribution has exactly the same share of national income as the bottom 40%. In other words, people at the top per person have 4 times the income of people at the bottom. And as the PALMA goes up to, in the most extreme cases, it can get to something between 7 and 15, we've seen. It's still telling you something that has a very explicit meaning. So in terms of the accountability of policymakers for example, targets they might set on income inequality in the post-2015 development framework, the PALMA gives you something that really lends itself to accountability. It's completely transparent about what it is. It misses this part of the distribution in the middle, which, as I've said, is relatively stable, but it's completely transparent about doing that. Now, we've actually shown with the Gini coefficient, with the most common series, you can basically predict the Gini perfectly just by using the top 10% and the bottom 40% shares of income. So in practice, the Gini doesn't actually have any more information than the PALMA, but it's simply very opaque about the way it uses those two components of the distribution to get to a single number, and it's not at all transparent about how that's happening, nor does it have any good intuitive basis. The Palmer, on the other hand, is completely clear about what it's doing, and the intuition is obvious. Now, we don't really want to replace the tyranny of the Gini with the tyranny of the Palmer. We don't want to move from one single measure that has strengths and weaknesses to another one. What we really want is to push back on this idea that it's okay in general to use the Gini. We should be looking at other measures like the share of the top 1% of the distribution, or the difference between the median and the mean. Other ways of capturing what's happening across the broad distribution. But if you're only going to use one measure of income inequality, please don't let it be the Gini. It's just not good enough to capture where the change is happening and when the changes become more important as inequality is more extreme.